I still remember that cold morning like it was yesterday, the sound of the wind against the kitchen window, the smell of oatmeal cooking on the stove, and the quiet weight in my chest that something wasn't right. My name is Linda, and I live in a small town in Kansas. It's peaceful here, where people wave when you drive by and gossip travels faster than the wind. I had worked most of my life as a school cafeteria lady, not fancy work, but it helped me raise my only daughter, Emily. Emily was always bright and beautiful, a little wild too. She had big dreams of leaving our small town and becoming someone important. She wanted to travel to New York or maybe Los Angeles, and I wanted that for her too, even though I knew it meant she'd leave me one day. But what I didn't expect was that when she finally left, she'd also leave behind her 3 little children. It was 13 years ago when Emily showed up at my doorstep, her hair messy, her eyes swollen from crying, and 3 small children standing beside her. The oldest, Jacob, was 7, shy and quiet, the middle one. Sophie was 4, full of questions and laughter, and the baby Noah was barely 1. Emily looked at me and said, "Mama, I can't do this anymore. I need to find myself. I just need a break." I didn't understand what she meant. I thought maybe a weekend, maybe a month. But when I asked her how long, she said, "I don't know." I remember standing there holding Noah in my arms. As Emily got into her old car, the kids cried as she drove away. I waved until I couldn't see her anymore, and then I walked inside, locked the door, and sat on the couch with all 3 kids huddled against me. I didn't know what to do. I just knew they needed me. The first few weeks were hard. The kids would ask every night, "When is mommy coming back?" And I'd say, "Soon, baby, soon," even though I had no idea the baby would cry in the middle of the night, and I'd rock him until dawn, whispering little prayers over him. I was already in my late 50s. My knees ached, my hands stiff from years of work, but somehow I found strength I didn't know I had. Months turned into years. I worked 2 jobs, one at the school and another cleaning houses on weekends. I made sure the kids had food, clothes, and a warm bed. Jacob grew quieter, Sophie grew stronger, and Noah grew up knowing me as his mama more than his own mother. Emily called sometimes, but only for a few minutes. She'd ask how they were and promise she'd visit soon. She never did. Every Christmas I'd wrap gifts for the kids and tell them they were from their mom. It broke my heart to lie, but I didn't want them to hate her. I kept every letter she ever sent, which weren't many, just a few scribbled words here and there like, "I'm doing better now," or "Tell the kids I love them." Once she sent $50 with a note saying buy them something nice. That was it. But I never complained. I believed one day she'd come back. When Jacob turned 18, he got a scholarship to college. He was the first in our family to go. I remember crying the day he left, not just because I was proud, but because I had done it somehow. I had raised him when I thought I couldn't. Sophie started high school and became a cheerleader. She was bright and loud and full of life, and she'd always tell me, "Grandma, you saved us," and I'd laugh and say, "No, baby, we saved each other." Noah was the sweetest. He'd follow me everywhere. He'd help me in the garden and say, "Grandma, I'm going to build you a big house one day with a porch and rocking chairs and a kitchen just for your pies." He made me feel young again. He made all the hard days worth it. Then one day after 13 years, my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice was different, sharper, colder. She said, "Mama, I'm coming home." I was surprised but happy. I told the kids and they were confused. They barely remembered her when she arrived. She looked different, expensive clothes, fancy car. She said she had a business in the city and things were finally good. I thought maybe we could heal. But what I didn't expect was what came next. A week later, she stood in my living room, her voice trembling with anger, and she said, "Mama, you kidnapped my kids." I was so stunned. I thought I didn't hear her right. She said, "You had no right to keep them all these years. I'm their mother, and you made them hate me." I felt my knees go weak. I tried to explain that she left them, that she asked me to watch them, but she refused to listen. She said she was going to the police. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't sleep or eat. I was terrified. They were my whole life. Those children, I had fed them, clothed them, prayed for them, held them when they were sick. How could she say I kidnapped them? The sheriff came by, asking questions. The kids were confused, hurt, scared. Jacob came home from college to be with me. He said, "Grandma, don't worry, we'll fix this." When the case reached family court, I felt like the world had turned upside down. Emily looked at me across the courtroom like a stranger. She told the judge, I stole her children, that I brainwashed them against her. The judge asked me to speak, and I stood up, my hands shaking, and said, Your Honor, I never stole anything. I just picked up the pieces when my daughter broke. I raised those children because someone had to, because love doesn't ask for permission, it just shows up when needed. The kids were allowed to speak too. Jacob stood tall and said, Grandma saved us. She gave us everything. Sophie cried when she spoke, saying, Mama, we love you, but you left us. Noah just held my hand and said, I don't want to go anywhere. The courtroom was silent. When it was over, the judge looked at Emily for a long moment and then said, Mrs. Richardson, it seems clear your mother did not kidnap anyone. She raised your children out of love, not deceit. Case dismissed. I felt my heart release a breath I had been holding for 13 years. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. I just sat there feeling the weight of everything lift slowly. Emily stormed out without saying a word. I haven't seen her since. But I still pray for her every night. I don't hate her. I just hope one day she finds peace. The kids still live close by. Jacob's a teacher now. Sophie's married with a baby, and Noah, well, he just bought me that porch he promised all those years ago. Sometimes when I sit there rocking in the evening breeze watching the sunset, I think about everything that happened, and I whisper to myself, love is not about who gives birth. It's about who stays, who shows up, who fights quietly through the nights. And if I had to do it all over again, I would, because no matter what she said, they were my babies too. After the court ended, I thought that chapter of my life was finally closed. I thought peace had come, but sometimes peace isn't quiet. It has its own kind of noise, the kind that lives inside your memories. I tried to go back to normal, cooking breakfast for the kids, helping Sophie with her little boy, and watering my garden every morning. But something in me had changed. That night after the trial, I sat by the window looking out at the stars. I kept asking myself, what kind of pain must my daughter have lived through to become so angry? I remembered her as a little girl with golden hair and the laugh that filled the house I used to braid her hair before school. And she'd tell me, Mama, one day I'll be famous and buy you a mansion. I smiled at the memory, and then tears rolled down my face. I realized I wasn't angry at her anymore. I was just sad. Jacob visited often. He'd bring groceries and sit with me on the porch. He'd talk about his students and how teaching made him feel alive. One evening he said, Grandma, do you ever miss her? And I said, every day, son. But missing someone doesn't mean I want them back the same way they have to want it too. Sophie would call me from her little apartment. She had become a mother, just like Emily once was. Sometimes I saw her stare at her baby with a kind of fear mixed with love. I'd ask her what's wrong, and she'd say, I just don't ever want to leave her grandma. I don't ever want to make the same mistakes. I told her, you won. Sweetheart, because you know what it feels like to be left. That kind of pain changes people, but it also teaches them how to stay. Months passed and life settled again until one afternoon I got a letter in the mail. It was from Emily. I froze for a long moment before opening it. Her handwriting was the same, but shakier. The letter was short. She said, Mama, I'm sorry for everything. I was angry and confused, and I blamed you when I should have blamed myself. I've been sick for a while, and I don't know what's going to happen, but I wanted to tell you thank you for raising them. She didn't say what she was sick with, but I could read the fear between the lines. My heart broke all over again. I showed the letter to Jacob and Sophie, and they both sat quietly. Sophie whispered, Grandma, maybe she needs us. I didn't know what to do. I prayed that night, asking for guidance, asking for strength. The next morning, I called the number she had written at the bottom of the page. A woman answered and said she was Emily's nurse. My daughter was in a small clinic 2 hours away. I packed a small bag, got in my old car, and drove there. When I walked into that clinic, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked so thin. Her hair had lost its shine, and her eyes that once burned with defiance were tired. She smiled weakly when she saw me and said, Mama, you came. I took her hand and said, Of course I did, sweetheart. I never stopped being your mother. We talked for hours. She told me she had made bad choices, that the city had changed her, that she had trusted people who only used her. She had tried to start over many times but never found peace. She said she was diagnosed with heart failure, and the doctors weren't sure how long she had left. I held her hand tighter and said, Then let's make the time you do have count. The next few weeks I stayed with her. I cooked small meals, helped her sit outside in the sun, and we talked about everything, the pain, the anger, the missing years. We even laughed at old memories. She said, "Mama, you must hate me for what I did." And I told her, "No, baby, I never hated you. I just hurt for you. You were lost and I was just waiting for you to find your way home." One day Sophie came to visit with her baby. When Emily saw her granddaughter, she began to cry. She reached out to hold the baby's tiny hand and whispered, "I don't deserve this." I said, "Yes, you do, Emily. Everyone deserves one more chance." Sophie forgave her that day. I could see it in her eyes. The circle of pain that had haunted our family began to break. Jacob came too. He didn't say much at first, but when he hugged her goodbye, he whispered, "I forgive you, Mom," and I saw something shift inside her like a light flickering one last time before the dark. Emily passed away. 3 weeks later, I was holding her hand. When she took her last breath, she looked peaceful, and that gave me comfort at her small funeral. I stood beside my grandchildren and realized that sometimes love doesn't fix everything, but it heals enough to let you breathe again. Afterward, I brought her ashes home and planted a rose bush in the garden where she used to play as a little girl. Every spring it blooms pink and soft like forgiveness. I sit by it often with Noah, who still lives nearby. He tells me, "Grandma, you did everything right," and I smile because I didn't. I just did what I could. Now, when I think about my life, I realize it wasn't about right or wrong. It was about showing up when love was needed, about choosing kindness when anger felt easier, and about holding on even when everything told me to let go. I may have lost my daughter for many years, but in the end, love found its way back. The house feels quieter now than it ever has, the kind of quiet that hums softly in your ears, even when no one is around. Sometimes I catch myself expecting to hear the laughter of little feet running down the hall or the sound of Emily's voice calling Mama from the kitchen, but all I hear is the ticking of the clock and the wind brushing against the window. It's peaceful, but also a little lonely. It has been 2 years since Emily passed, and though the pain isn't sharp anymore, it still lives inside me like a soft echo. I often think about all those years when anger and confusion stood between us, and I wonder if things could have been different, but then I remind myself that we all do what we can with what we know at the time. Life doesn't give you manuals, it just gives you moments, and you do your best to make them matter. Jacob visits every Sunday. He always brings fresh flowers for the table and asks if I've been eating enough. He's still teaching, and the kids in his class adore him. Sometimes he reads me essays. His students write about family and kindness. And he smiles because he says, "Grandma, your stories inspired me to teach them about love." Sophie comes over with her husband and her baby girl every few weeks, and that baby, oh, she's my sunshine. She's got the same curly hair Emily had as a child, and when she laughs, it feels like the house is alive again. Noah lives just a few streets away. He checks on me every morning before work. He'll bring me coffee and say, "Grandma, don't you dare forget your medicine." And I always pretend to be annoyed, but it warms my heart because that boy became everything I prayed for. I raised him with nothing but prayers, and now he takes care of me without being asked. One evening not long ago, I was sitting on the porch watching the sun go down. The sky was painted in gold and lavender, and the air smelled of spring. The rose bush I planted for Emily was in full bloom. I could almost hear her laugh in the rustling of the leaves. Noah came and sat beside me. He didn't say much for a while, just stared at the sunset with me. Then he said, "Grandma, did you ever stop loving her?" I turned my head and said, "No, honey. Love like that never stops. It changes shape. Sometimes it hurts, sometimes it heals, but it never really dies." He nodded and said, "I think about Mom a lot. I don't remember her much, but I like to think she's proud of us." I said, "I know she is. She found peace, and that means she finally saw what love really looks like. Not the kind that leaves, but the kind that stays." A few months later, our town held a small event at the community center. They were honoring people who had made a difference in the lives of others, and to my surprise, Jacob had secretly submitted my name. They called it the Heart of Hope Award. When they called me on stage, I felt my hands shake. I didn't think I deserved it. I had just done what any mother or grandmother would do. I stood there in front of everyone and said, I am not special. I just did what love asked me to do. Love told me not to give up. Love told me to stay when walking away would have been easier, and that's what I did. When the applause filled the room, I looked out and saw Jacob, Sophie, Noah, and their families smiling at me. I realized that all the pain, all the long nights, all the tears had led to this moment. A family that had once been broken now stood whole and strong because of love that refused to quit. After the ceremony, a young woman came to me. She said, "Miss Linda, your story gave me courage. I was raised by my grandma too, and I always wondered if I was enough. Now I know I am." I hugged her and said, "You are more than enough, sweetheart. Sometimes God gives the hardest battles to the ones with the softest hearts." That night when I got home, I sat on my bed holding Emily's last letter. I still read it from time to time. The paper is worn, the ink fading, but the words still speak to me. "Mama, I'm sorry. Thank you for raising them." It reminds me that forgiveness isn't just for the people who hurt us. It's also for ourselves, for the parts of us that still ache for what could have been. As I grow older, I've learned that love is not measured in grand gestures, but in small, quiet acts: the meals cooked, the tears wiped, the hands held through the night. When I look back now, I don't see a life of loss. I see a life of purpose, a life where kindness had the final word. Sometimes I sit by the window watching the kids play outside, and I whisper to myself, "I did it. I didn't quit. I turned pain into love and love into legacy, and maybe that's all any of us can hope to do." It was a quiet Saturday morning when I woke up to the smell of cinnamon rolls baking in the kitchen. Sophie had come early with her little girl, and she was humming one of those old songs I used to sing to Emily when she was small. The sound filled the house like sunshine spilling through the windows. I sat there for a moment just listening, my heart full and aching all at once. Sophie peeked around the corner and said, "Grandma, you're up. Come taste this." She brought me a warm roll, still soft from the oven. I took a bite and smiled, saying, "You finally learned my secret recipe." She laughed and said I had the best teacher in the world. Then her face turned serious, and she asked, "Grandma, can I tell you something?" I said, "Of course, honey, you can tell me anything." She sat down beside me, holding my hand, and said, "I've been thinking about fostering children. There are so many out there who need someone the way we needed you." I felt tears gather in my eyes. I squeezed her hand and said, "That's the most beautiful thing you could ever do, Sophie, because love multiplies when you share it, and you have more than enough to give." She smiled and whispered, "I want to make you proud." I said, "Sweetheart, you already have." That afternoon we drove to the park to meet Jacob and Noah. The air was soft and full of laughter. Jacob had brought his students for a picnic, and they all called me Grandma Linda, which made me laugh. They said I was famous in their class because he told my stories about courage and forgiveness. Noah grilled burgers and teased Sophie about burning the rolls. We were noisy and happy, and for a moment I thought, this is what heaven must feel like. While we were sitting there, a woman from the local newspaper came over. She said she'd heard about my award and wanted to do a piece about our family. I didn't know what to say at first, but Jacob said, "Grandma, you should tell it. Maybe it'll help someone." So I did. I told her about the years of raising the kids, about Emily leaving and then coming back, and about learning to forgive. Her eyes filled with tears, and she said, "People need to hear stories like yours, the kind that remind them love can survive anything." A few weeks later, the article came out. The headline said, "Local Grandma Turns Pain into Purpose." It felt strange to see my face in the paper, but the words were kind. They talked about how family isn't always about blood, but about who stays through the storms. After that, I started getting letters from strangers. Some were from single parents, others from grandparents raising kids. Some just wanted to say, "Thank you for giving them hope." I kept every letter in a little wooden box on my dresser. Sometimes at night I'd read them out loud and feel like I wasn't alone anymore. One letter stood out. It was from a woman named Carol, who said she had left her kids years ago because of addiction. She wrote that my story gave her courage to go find them and ask for forgiveness. That letter broke me in the best way, because it meant Emily's story, her mistakes, her pain were not wasted. They had become someone else's hope. Life moved gently after that. My body slowed down, but my heart stayed strong. Every morning I'd sit by the window with my coffee, watching the sun rise and talking to God. I'd thank Him for every hard day that led me here. I'd thank him for the kids, for the laughter, for the love that never gave up. Sometimes I'd whisper Emily's name and tell her how everyone was doing. I liked to believe she could hear me somewhere beyond the clouds. One evening, Sophie came over with her foster kids, two shy little girls with big brown eyes. They clung to her like she was the only safe thing in the world. I bent down and said, "Hello, darlings, I'm Grandma Linda." They smiled for the first time that day, and something in my heart bloomed again. Watching Sophie care for them reminded me of the cycle of love, how it never truly ends. It just keeps finding new hearts to grow in. Jacob started a community group at his school called the Heart Project, where students helped local families with food and clothes. He said, "Grandma, it's all because of you. You showed me what giving really means." I told him, "Son, it was never about giving things. It was about giving time, giving kindness, giving love." Noah finally finished building the porch swing. He promised me all those years ago, he said, "It's for you, Grandma, so you can rest." Now, I sat on that swing every evening watching the sunset. The rose bush glowing pink beside it, the laughter of children echoing from the street. I felt peace, deep, quiet peace. Sometimes at night when the world was still, I'd think back on the beginning that day. Emily left those three little faces looking up at me, scared and lost. I had no idea how I'd survive or what the years would bring, but somehow by grace and love and pure stubborn faith, I made it through. I didn't save the world. I just loved three children with everything I had, and that was enough. I learned that the bravest thing anyone can do is keep loving. Even when their heart has been broken, I learned that kindness heals even the deepest wounds, and that forgiveness is not weakness. It's freedom. The years rolled by like pages turning in a book you've read 100 times, but still find comfort in my hair turned silver. My hands grew slower, but my heart never stopped feeling young. Every morning I still woke up to the sound of birds outside my window and the smell of coffee brewing on the stove. My porch swing became my favorite place to sit. It creaked a little when I moved, but it sang to me in its own sweet rhythm. The rose bush for Emily had grown tall now, and every spring it filled the yard with pink blossoms. Sometimes I'd sit beside it with Sophie's little foster girls and tell them stories about their mama and about how love can grow even in places that were once filled with pain. The girls would listen wide-eyed, one holding my hand, the other leaning against my shoulder, and I'd think how beautiful it is that love keeps giving new chances to bloom. Jacob would stop by after work, his eyes tired, but kind. He'd talk about his students and how he was helping one of them through a hard time. I'd tell him, "You remind me of your mother when she was young, full of fire and dreams." He'd smile and say, "Maybe she finally got her wish, Grandma, because through us she still lives." Noah had built a small workshop beside his house. He'd spend hours fixing furniture for the neighbors refusing to take money for it. He said, "Grandma, kindness doesn't need a price tag. It just needs a heart willing to give." Every time he said that, I'd feel a lump in my throat because he sounded so much like the man I prayed he'd become. One evening as the sun set low, I felt a kind of tiredness that wasn't from age but from a full life well lived. The sky was glowing orange and gold, and the air was warm. I sat on the porch swing, watching the little ones play in the yard. Sophie came out with 2 cups of tea and handed me one. She said, "Grandma, do you ever wish things had been easier?" I looked at her and said, "No, sweetheart, because if it had been easy, I might never have learned how strong love can be." She smiled with tears in her eyes and said, "You're the reason I believe in good people." I told her I'm just a woman who refused to stop believing even when it hurt. Then Noah joined us sitting on the porch rail. He said, "Grandma, tell us again how you managed to raise us when you had nothing." I laughed softly and said, "I didn't have nothing. I had love, and sometimes love is more than enough." That night, as the stars came out, I thought about Emily again. I wondered what she'd think if she could see us now. The house filled with laughter, her children strong, her grandchildren safe. I think she'd be proud. I whispered her name to the wind and said, "We're okay, baby, we made it." Not long after that, I got a call from the same community center that had given me the AW. Years ago, they were organizing a program to help grandparents raising their grandchildren, and they wanted me to come speak. I hesitated because I wasn't sure I had the strength anymore, but Jacob said, "Grandma, your words can change lives." And that was enough for me to say yes. On the day of the event, I stood in front of a room full of tired faces, some filled with worry, some with quiet hope. I told them my story, not with fancy words, but with truth. I said there were days I wanted to give up, days I cried alone in the kitchen, days I didn't think I'd make it, but every morning I chose to keep going because love doesn't quit. Love shows up even when the world walks away. When I finished speaking, people stood and clapped, but what mattered most were the tears in their eyes. I walked off the stage and a young woman came to me with a baby in her arms. She said, "I thought I couldn't do this anymore, but now I think I can." That moment right there was worth every struggle I'd ever faced. As time moved on, my body slowed more, but my heart stayed steady. My family started calling Sundays our porch day. They'd all come over, kids playing, laughter echoing through the house. We'd eat fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and sweet pie, just like we used to. I'd sit in my rocking chair watching them and think how everything I lost once had come back to me in ways I never imagined. One evening, Jacob asked Grandma, "When you're gone, what do you want us to remember most about you?" I smiled and said, "Remember that love doesn't always look perfect, but it's real when it stays. Remember that forgiveness is stronger than anger, and that courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's just quietly holding on when the world says, 'Let go.'" That night I went to bed with peace in my heart. I dreamed of a house full of laughter, of Emily smiling, of all the children I had loved sitting around me. I woke with tears on my cheeks, but they weren't from sadness, they were from gratitude, because after all the storms, after all the years, after every heartbreak and healing, I finally understood that the greatest story I ever lived was not about pain, but about love that never gave up and never stopped believing. The days began to slow down after that. Each sunrise felt softer, each sunset a little closer to forever. I could feel it deep inside that my time was coming to a gentle end. But I wasn't afraid. I had lived a long life full of storms and sunshine. I had seen heartbreak and healing. I had loved with everything I had and been loved in return. What more could anyone ask for? One morning I woke before dawn and sat on the porch with my blanket around my shoulders. The air was cool and the world was quiet. I watched as the sky began to turn from gray to pink, and I whispered a little prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for all of it. The hard days that taught me strength, the lonely nights that taught me faith, the love that gave me purpose. I didn't ask for anything more. I just thanked him." Jacob came by later with coffee. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "Grandma, you look peaceful." I smiled and said, "I am, baby. I really am." He sat beside me, and we didn't talk much. We didn't have to. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. Sophie came in the afternoon with her little girl, and those two foster girls who had now become her own. They ran around the yard chasing butterflies. Their laughter filled the air like music. I watched them and felt Emily there in their smiles. I felt her in the warmth of the sun on my face, and I knew she was close. That evening, Noah brought dinner and insisted on fixing my old porch light. He said, "Grandma, I don't like the thought of you sitting out here in the dark." I laughed softly and said, "Oh, honey, I'm never in the dark, not anymore." He looked at me puzzled, but smiled anyway. That night, when everyone left, I sat in my rocking chair one last time. I held Emily's letter in my hands and read it again, even though I already knew every word. "Mama, I'm sorry. Thank you for raising them." My eyes blurred with tears, but I smiled. I whispered back, "You're welcome, sweetheart, and I forgive you. I always did." The moonlight fell gently through the window, lighting the rose bush outside. It swayed in the breeze like it was saying goodbye. I closed my eyes and let all the memories pass through me, the laughter of little feet, the smell of pancakes in the morning, the sound of the swing creaking the tiny hands that once held mine, the quiet forgiveness that healed everything I had carried. When I took my last breath, it was not with fear, but with love pure and still. The next morning, when Jacob came to bring me coffee, he found me in my chair, peaceful, a small smile still on my lips. The letter was folded neatly in my hands, and the rose bush outside had bloomed overnight, brighter than ever before. They buried me under that rose bush. Just as I had asked, the whole family gathered. The sun was shining the sky, so blue it looked painted, Sophie spoke with tears in her eyes. She said, "Grandma taught us that love is the greatest strength of all and that forgiveness can change everything." Then Noah said, "Grandma didn't just raise us, she raised generations because her love never stopped growing." Years went by, but people still spoke my name. The Heart Project continued to grow. Jacob's students started their own kindness clubs. Sophie became a mentor for young mothers, and Noah built homes for struggling families. Every time they helped someone, they said, "Grandma Linda taught us this." And every spring when the rose bush bloomed, Sophie's little girl, now grown, would sit on that porch swing and tell her children the story of the woman who loved them all into becoming who they were. She'd tell them about courage that whispers, not shouts, about kindness that saves, not judges, and about forgiveness that sets hearts free. Sometimes at night, when the wind blows through that garden, it carries the faint scent of roses and a soft whisper that says, "Keep loving, keep believing, keep showing up." Because love never really dies. It just finds new hearts to live in. The end.